And I'd like to welcome all of you as president of the Aldo Leopold Audubon Society this evening. It's quite a pleasure to have such a good audience for each of our recent programs. Thank you very much for joining us this evening and for being so loyal to all of our programs. And I will now pass it over to Susan to introduce our speaker.
All right, thank you very much, Ned, and welcome. We have a wonderful presentation tonight on the Kirtland's warbler. This is wonderful to hear great conservation stories, and this is one that we're going to hear tonight. Let me just introduce Davin, our speaker tonight. I'm going to read a little bit about who he is. Davin Lopez has been with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources since 2005. In 2011, he joined the Wisconsin DNR Bureau of Natural Heritage Conservation, formerly the Endangered Resources, where he serves as the state whooping crane reintroduction coordinator and state lead for the Kirtland's Warbler Conservation Project. Previously, he was a state coordinator for the Wisconsin DNR Chronic Wasting Disease Program. He has previously worked at Colorado State University as a malaria research lab technician and as a zookeeper at the Denver and Pueblo zoos. Davin was born and raised in Denver, Colorado, earned a bachelor's degree in biology and anthropology from New Mexico State University, and a master's degree in population ecology from the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh. Davin, we are so happy to have you here tonight. I'll turn it over to you where you can take it away.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. So welcome everyone. I hope everyone is staying safe during these crazy times and hopefully enjoying a little bit warmer weather than we've been having. Do you have any preference whether we save questions till the end or just, I don't really. I mean, if you'd rather ask questions as we go.
It's up to you. I think what works really well is I'll keep a monitor on the chat, and people, if you could locate the chat, that's a wonderful way to ask questions. And I'll keep an eye out for that. And if that seems like there's a lot of activity, I might pause you at that point, or if you want to check in. Otherwise, we'll wait till the end and take questions at the end.
Okay, sounds good. Oh, again, really glad to be here. So I'm going to talk to you about Kirtland's warblers. It's a conservation success story, and specifically, I want to talk to you about what we're doing here in Wisconsin for the bird, with a little bit overview of how the whole species is doing. First, I want to acknowledge all the partners that go into conserving this special and rare little bird. It was one of the first birds ever to be listed in the Endangered Species Act, so it's iconic that way. It's also one of the first to ever be removed from the endangered species list. So we're very happy about that success. And in particular, agencies, most of the birds are found in Michigan, of course, and we have small populations here in Wisconsin and in Ontario, Canada. So a lot of these partners we see up here are specific to Michigan, but particularly, I'd like to thank the U.S. Forest Service and the Natural Resources Foundation. Yeah.
You're popping in and out a little bit, and I'm not sure if if the movement just maybe we're having, some people are saying it's a little unstable, and I'm hearing the same thing. It's breaking up just a little bit, but
okay. Hold on quick.
Davin, I think if you are slightly closer to your screen, it comes through a little better.
Headset, so, and which is why I chose that route. Let me see.
That's coming through better now.
Okay, I moved my headset a little bit. I meant to do this earlier, disconnect from my VPN. That makes it lag a little bit so it could be internet problems. You don't think so, but here in Madison, in downtown Madison, we have pretty bad internet problems. So it's been fun during this remote work period.
Okay. Yeah, it is breaking up a little bit.
You still breaking up a little bit?
It is, yeah. Yeah, we didn't have that last time, so I'm not sure.
Okay. Hold on.
Just stay really still when you're talking. Just kidding.
It shouldn't matter. That was why. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me see here. Hold on real quick.
Yep, just give us a minute. I see people are expressing the same thing, that it's breaking up a little bit. We're working on it.
Closing out. Let's see. Can you hear me now at all?
Yeah, definitely.
That's better.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess let's see if that's any better. If that doesn't work, I'll take my headset off.
Okay. Great, thanks.
So I was saying, in particular, I'd like to thank the Natural Resources Foundation. They donate a lot of money to us through the Bird Protection Fund every year. In normal years, we utilize that money to hire nest monitors that do reproductive and demographic studies on the birds, particularly in Marinette and Adams County. And of course, our partners in the Fish and Wildlife Service, which a lot of this presentation is borrowed from them. So I work for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources in the Bureau of Natural Heritage Conservation, NHC. And that's primarily the non-game bureau. We focus on rare and endangered species and trying to keep common species common, but we don't deal with any of the hunted species per se. I won't go through our whole mission, but basically our mission is to conserve the resources of the state and for their own benefit and for their own worth and for the people of the state. So the overview of the talk, I'll start with an introduction to the bird, which will include some songs and life histories, including and some IDs and some background. We know the status of the bird in the state of Wisconsin, and then how we got into a conservation success story and how we got them off of the endangered species list. And they completely were delisted and not just downlisted, so they're not even on the endangered species list anymore. They're not even threatened. And you'll show you a little bit later how we were able to do that with the population recovery. And then conclusion, and I'll take questions, but I'll also take questions if you have any during the talk. So I don't know how many of you have been out in the field, either here or in Michigan, and have heard the bird, but this is a typical male. This is how they sing. They tend to sing at the top of treetops, either in these jack pines, red pines, or sometimes in the oak trees. How's my audio coming through now?
It's good. It's really much clearer now. Thank you. Okay,
good. They're really visible, and they also have a really, really loud song. They're a pretty large warbler too. So, play the song for you. Are you hearing it?
Yes, we are. Loud and clear.
Okay, it's not coming through on my end at all. That's weird.
Oh, yeah, we hear it.
You can see it's a pretty distinctive song, and so the males, when they get on territory, will start to set up their territories, which can be, depending on the habitat, anywhere from 20 acres to maybe even 100 acres, depending on the resources. We tend to have much larger territories here in Wisconsin than they do in Michigan, and probably because of density-related issues. It has a really long tail. Like I said, it's a relatively large warbler, has a pretty heavy bill for a warbler. It's usually kind of a bluish gray on the upper part and lemon, yellow on the underparts, pretty striking, and the males are pretty striking. And it has that broken white eye ring that's characteristic. Doesn't really look like any other warbler out there, and doesn't really sound like any other warbler. So it could be, I mean, there's a few that maybe be mistaken, but it's a pretty identifiable bird. It has bluish gray with black streaks on the back and the side. It has a bright neon throat and has black lores, as you can see that in the top between the eyes and the beak there. So all those things really make it a very distinctive bird to look for. And this is the female. They're similar, but drab, and they don't have the black head on them. Finer streaking on the chest, and they don't have that. Again, they don't have no black mask or anything, or lores. So their habitat preferences. This is what led them to be a very endangered species and a very rare species, is they are habitat specialists. They really require historically large stands of young jack pine. We have found in Wisconsin that they will tolerate some red pine, particularly in Adams County. We've seen that. We're doing some experimental planting in Adams County, where we purposely interplanted jack and red pine to see how they would be able to utilize that. But basically they require jack pines for nesting. Even though they're a ground nester, they nest underneath those jack pines, and they require them to be under about 20 years old because of the structure that those younger jack pines have. Once they are over 20, you can so the picture that's kind of to the right of the word openings. That's under 10-year-old jack pine, and you can see how the boughs and this is an opening. So this is a classic place that a Kirtland's warbler might nest. So they'd curl up under that that jack pine there that's kind of sitting in the middle or along the edge of that clearing there. But they require those jack pine boughs to be for concealment. And once those jack pine get to be over to about 20 years old, they start to self-prune those lower levels, and they're not the birds will not be able to utilize them anymore. So they'll move on. So they're really specialist. We typically say that they want a single pair would want to stand up greater than 80 acres, so 32 hectares, and it's really dense jack pine. Again, we can intermix some red pine, but it really requires scattered openings. So overall, it's about 75% canopy cover or 25% openings, and overall with the openings, that's about 1,100 trees per acre. The jack pine community is really a place of extremes. It's usually found in very well-drained sandy soils, and historically it was present because of the presence of wildfires. Is real wildfire dependent. That really relies on wildfires to germinate the seeds. Those wildfires would create the openings and also knock back the pines, and so that they would become they'll be young again. Jack pine are very flammable. So it was frequent fires in these kind of areas. These are very typically kind of arid areas because of the soils, and so this is an ecosystem that really relied on fire. Sometimes you'll hear this species referred to as the firebird because it was such a fire dependent species. They also require a very flat surface. They don't like any topography. And the key for those well-drained, the nesting is those well-drained soils again, because since they are a ground nester, and I'll show you a picture, it'll make a cup in a nest in the grass. They can't tolerate any standing water. So these areas have to be relatively upland. So even in some areas we have jack pine that we find socially, like Jackson County is a good example of that. They won't nest in some of those areas because they're just too wet. So you can see they're really hard. This is one reason we really try to keep people out of their habitat during the nesting season. They're really cryptic nests. The only way we really find them is by following a male. hopefully when it has food in its mouth or nesting materials, and we watch and see where they kind of disappear into under these trees, and then we'll approach the nest once and to confirm that it is in fact a nest, and then we'll keep our distance. So this is a nest that was found after the birds were after the eggs were hatched, and you can see the young in there. They're little, I mean, I don't know how much is showing up on your end, but little black blobs in there. Like most songbirds, not terribly attractive when they're in that infancy. So they'll go, well, it's quite an art form to try to find the nests, which is why we hire full-time dedicated nest monitors. They basically have to be out there while the males are singing in the mornings. So from sun up to about 11 p.m. and follow these birds around and try to determine the territory size, what the nesting status is, and how many young there are. We're particularly interested in that in Adams County initially, because that's where the birds were first found. We're also Marinette County is an emerging county, and if we get decent enough nesting in other counties throughout Wisconsin, we'll do the similar things. We're really concerned about the demographics, and Wisconsin is quite a bit different landscape for the birds than Michigan is. Michigan really has some huge tracts of state and federal land that are being managed for Kirtland's warblers and had managed for Kirtland's warblers forever. And typically the forests that we're looking at in Wisconsin are smaller, much more fragmented. And the other thing that of concern is cowbirds. So that was another reason we really wanted to get a handle on the demographics of these birds. Not only are they, obviously we figured out they were nesting, and we had singing males and we had females, but we wanted to know if those nests were successful or not. And we've gone through several iterations of just following them around and getting that to having grad students work on the project. In the winter, they go down to the Bahamas and enjoy the weather down there. Fortunately, obviously, we had that hurricane issues last year. Fortunately, the birds were not there yet when that happened, and so we dodged a bullet there. But it's just one of those things when you have a rare species, they all winter in these relatively small areas. Geographically, that you can really have these catastrophic events happen and really decimate the species. So you can see that they migrate from Ontario, Wisconsin, and Michigan through that flyway along the coast, down through Florida, and into the Keys and beyond to the Caribbean. They've been found on the Dominican Republic, Bermuda, Cuba, and even in coastal Mexico. Excuse me. And in the winter, they occur in these early successional scrublands that are characterized by dense, low, broadleaf shrubs and varied foliage with layers of small openings resulting from anthropogenic disturbances, often goat grazing. The males typically arrive in Wisconsin and Michigan in early to mid-May, start nesting late May, early June. And beginning in September, the adults leave and the juveniles follow in a couple of weeks later. It's a 3,000-mile round trip. And just a note, the oldest bird that we've been able to document in Wisconsin was a bird that was born is banded after Hassier in 1995, and it was resighted in 2005 was the last time we saw it, and which made it over 11 years old. So during its course of its lifetime, it flew over 30,000 miles. That's a lot of mileage for a little bird. So a little background and why they're relevant to the Fish and Wildlife Service, and of course the DNR, Michigan and Wisconsin DNR, and all the other partners that go into conserving them. Historically, until their delisting, they were managed under the recovery team, which is somewhat common in listed species, and it's a multi-partner program that that is designed to recover the species, and the whole goal is to enact a recovery plan and to ultimately hopefully delist a bird. Since then, because they're such a habitat and management dependent species, we decided that we couldn't just let them go. I mean, they're not going to survive on the landscape without human intervention because of the fire suppression. We just don't have the fire regime that historically they would require. And so we decided to form a conservation team, which is largely the same partners that were in the recovery team, and those partners I showed you early on. So it's a multi-state, multi-country, and multi-partner conservation team that's really working on conserving the species. Populations of the bird were dipped to a low of about 167 pairs in 1974, and they were confined to Michigan, Lower Peninsula. And when the Endangered Species Act was passed into law in 1973, the Kirtland's warbler was on the initial list of endangered and threatened species, along with a few other iconic species like whooping cranes. The size of the Kirtland's warbler population is likely fluctuated with their habitat availability over time. Presumably it peaked around the late 1800s, but as widespread agriculture was decreasing, brown-headed cowbirds had not become established on the breeding range yet, but the winter habitat was becoming intensely commercialized in the Bahamas, and as fire regimes were taken away, as people were no longer clearing land as much as they were and disturbing the land out there, and as cowbirds became much more sedentary and not that nomadic, with the decline of the buffalo and bison, all these things were just detrimental to the species, and through all those factors, they started to decline as their habitat disappeared. So the bird in need of help, obviously, when his population dipped to a low 167 pairs, there's not a lot of wiggle room there. Very few species have really recovered from that kind of low level, and really, I mean, you're on the brink of extinction with this one disease, one weather event, especially we're in one geographic area, both in the winter and in the summer. So it only, up until 1995, it only had been known to nest in the Lower Peninsula of Michigan. Historically, I'm sure it nested throughout Wisconsin, Ontario, Minnesota, any place where we have the Jack Pine Barrens, but it had been really confined to those state lands and some federal lands in Lower Michigan. So fire is really the habitat generator. There's a picture of a jack pine stand on fire. It's amazing. We do plant these species jack pine, and that works okay. They will reseed a little bit, but their serratinous seed coats germinate the fresh ash really well in areas that have had recent wildfires. Like in Adams County and in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, those areas that are burned have really come in with really dense jack pine stands very quickly after the fires, the year after the fires are gone. So they germinate so much better if there's if fire is present. It's similar to lodgepole pines that you see out west. If anybody's been to Yellowstone, that's those, you can see the areas that when they've had these large forest fires in Yellowstone, that the lodgepole pines have just come back in these dense single species stands. And you can see the different cones that those serratinous cones that I mentioned. So, fire danger, obviously, there was a lot of fire suppression going on out there, and it was a major push of the federal agencies. In 1944, the Forest Service started to use the mascot Smokey the Bear, Smokey Bear as and to encourage the prevention of forest fires. And everybody's seen or heard those ads. It's still a very iconic figure that the Forest Service uses to present what their fire dangers are. And it was really successful. It really made people fire aware. And of course, as people became to inhabit the land and moved into these forested areas, there was a really big impetus to not have their houses burned down. We see this going on not so much in Wisconsin anymore, but really out west in California. The really impetus on fire suppression because people are living within these forests and they are in danger of fire. So as the land became more fragmented and the fire was suppressed, these jack pine stands grew up. Also in a lot of areas, jack pine stands were clear cut because red pine it's not ideal, but it will grow in these sandy soils. And jack pine has very little commercial value. Obviously, red pine is the pine of choice for most lumber and most pulp. So there was not only they were just removing the habitat, but even in the areas that just still had habitat. I mean, even in like state forests and national forests, fire suppression was still going on. Even then, we didn't really appreciate the role that fire had on regenerating ecosystems. And so those stands were just becoming too old for the birds to use. So that led the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to really focus on delisting them under the Endangered Species, to conserve them under the Endangered Species Act. And Wisconsin came into play into that, this whole Kirtland's warbler in 2007. And the 2020 nesting season marked the 13th year that the Kirtland's warbler has been documented within the state. And we've fortunately seen it continue to expand geographically and numerically. So Dean Tomaso was a birder, and he was just out birding in these commercial forest lands, and was owned by Plum Creek at that time in Adams County. And he had seen Kirtland's warblers in Michigan, so he was kind of familiar with their call and swore that that's what he was hearing, and reported it to the Wisconsin DNR and the Fish and Wildlife Service. And we went out, and before I was working on the project, but my predecessor went out, and sure enough, we found that year we found 8 males and 3 females and 3 nests found in Adams County. So that was something else. It was they probably had, I'm sure they had been in Wisconsin for a while, but we believe they're probably coming from the UP. And as the populations have increased in Michigan, we've seen them start to disperse more. They're pretty much saturated their habitat in the lower peninsula. So they're really starting to find new habitat, and that's making them disperse, which is a good thing for the species and a good thing for Wisconsin. You can see there's another picture of the nest, tiny little eggs, in comparison to the fingers of that gloved finger. We're really careful around that. We use scent away when we're approaching nests. To mask, we're wearing rubber boots, we're wearing gloves, because we don't want to have predators follow our human scent to these nests. And they're really obviously very susceptible, being a small bird, to ground predators, snakes, lizards, you name it. Almost anything can, obviously mammalian predators, anything can really just chow down on that, and they don't really have much of the defense. I mean, their whole defense is basically nest concealment and being cryptic. So as of 2020, we have found it in 5 different counties. Adams and Marinette are our strongholds. Adams being, of course, the first place it was found. Marinette has been coming on really strong. We've had sporadic breeding in Bayfield, and we've had birds found and sighted in Douglas, Vilas, and Jackson County. But last year was a pretty exciting year. We just a small population of birds in Jackson County. We hadn't seen them in the county for a long time, and this was far away from where we had originally seen the birds. These are on Jackson County forest lands around Black River Falls, and we found some males and females. We didn't find any nesting necessarily, but we really just didn't have much of a presence there for multiple reasons, including COVID. But it was very great news because the Jackson County Forest is one of our main partners, and they've been doing a lot of habitat management for the birds, and they continue. And it's one of their main goals is to manage their forest for Kirtland's warblers. So it was rewarding that we're creating the habitat, and they're coming there. But Marinette's also done a ton of work on their county forest, and that's really facilitated them. And we also, as I'll discuss in a little bit, we've used some tricks to try to draw in breeding males and get them to disperse. All the lands outside of Adams County are primarily public lands. We actually don't really know of any established nesting on private lands. Of course, we're not doing a lot of surveys on private lands, but most of it is on public lands. Adams is almost exclusively on private lands, and until 2020, Adams didn't even have a county forest association. They've begun to do that, which is a good, great step for us, and hopefully we can partner with them in the future. But there's very little public land at all in Adams County, and so again, the area they were found on is a private commercial land. It's now owned by a golf course company. So just one thing we do here in Wisconsin that the Fish and Wildlife Service takes the lead on, and see in that top left corner is Ron Refschneider, retired U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the woman is Sarah Warner. She's one of my primary partners on multiple projects here in Wisconsin. She's also based out of Madison here. And you can see the color bands, though we put on color bands so we can uniquely identify each of these birds. So we put on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, USGS metal band that every bird that's banded gets, but we also want to be able to identify these birds by sight so that we don't have to recapture them and read the number off of their band. So we do these color-coded things, bands on them so that we can spot them and be able to differentiate between different males, so we can really try to establish their territory size and their movements, and hopefully their migration patterns. Because there is obviously a lot of similar work being done in Michigan, and there's also a lot of work being done on the wintering grounds in the Bahamas, and a lot of field surveys being done there. So basically, we use that really bad-looking bird decoy. We put up a mist net, and we throw that in there, and these males are very aggressive. So if you play a male song in their territory, they're going to come check it out. And we oftentimes will catch the same bird multiple times in a day accidentally, because they're just so aggressive when they come, and their territories largely overlap a little bit on the edges. But so we go out and we purposely band the males. This is the primary way we've done it, although we also have banded nestlings when they're just about to fledge, because they can right before they can fly, because obviously they're a lot easier to catch, and when they're just basically time it perfectly when they're leaving the nest, but before they can really fly. So we've done both kinds of methodologies. So you can see what the bands look like on the bird there. This was, and so we call it birds by their color bands. So, the first letter of each color band. So each bird will have a 4-letter band. One of them is always A for the aluminum band. And then we also age the birds by their tail feathers. So you can see that that's what that's probably Ron or Joel Trick, another retired Fish and Wildlife Service employee there, is looking at the tail feathers, and they've done an extensive job of photographing all these tail feathers so they can really document and publish the aging of these birds too. And so they're really exact on this. And the lady holding the bird, that's Trina Soik. Credit her with a lot of this presentation. She's another one of my partners. She's out of Green Bay, another one of my Fish and Wildlife Service partners that I work with on a lot of different projects. So the conservation success story, and we're very proud that Wisconsin could be a part of that. And it's a lot that's gone into it, though. We can monitoring, cowbird control, playbacks that I'll get into, adaptive management. As we've learned that they've not only are just in these only jack pine forests, but will tolerate other types of commercial forests. And we do a lot of there's a lot of protections in place, and on both ends of the spectrum on their wintering and summer grounds to really offer them protection. A lot of awareness campaigns that go into it on both ends, and a lot of educational trips. Michigan does, Wisconsin does, the Bahamas do, and through all that work, we've had over 1,000 pairs for more than 10 years. In Wisconsin, the birds again are found in those 5 different counties. I don't know what happened to my black dot for Jackson County Forest. It seems to have disappeared, but anyway, those are the different areas. So the Sand Valley Golf Course, again, is that private land in Adams County, and then you can see how geographically the birds are kind of scattered throughout the sandy area. So that really lines up with our sand barrens and jack pine barrens that we have in the state. And here's a picture of the site 1 at Adams County. This is the first site that we found the birds. It is as an example of the birds. They've been there since 2007, but it's about 20 years old now, and the birds are starting to move out of there. We've barely had any birds in there last couple of years, and they've started to scatter to different parts of the property, including some of the areas that we've managed for the experimental plots, we call them, where we've planted jack pine and red pine in together, and it's just coming into the right age. So we really are aiming for this rotational function out there. So we have, trees that are coming of age, under 5 years old. We have trees that are the proper age of 5 to 15, 20 years, and then trees that are too old, and for the birds, for the species itself. And what we're trying to do also is we're working really towards this right now, is try to do a much more holistic management, because once those trees become older and over 20 years old, we can manage the trees again for other species. There's a lot of cool species that live in there, several sparrows, slender glass lizards, and then of course the federally endangered Carner blue butterfly, of which Wisconsin is the primary habitat for that butterfly. That's most of the butterflies in the world of Carner blues are found here in Wisconsin. So we're really critical for the preservation of that species. So we want to be able to manage these ecosystems for all the species that are in all the age structures that we need to benefit all these sensitive species. Since 2016, the Adams County site was bought by a Sand Valley golf resort, and they've taken it out of commercial production. They aim to, in Adams County, we have 2 areas that are protected under conservation easements. One of them specifically, it is very specific towards Kirtland's warbler conservation. The other one is just a more general forest conservation easement. And but both of them can't be developed, and there's limited infrastructure that could be put in those in terms of roads, like trails, I should say. But the rest of the property was basically just it's all commercial forest. Obviously, a lot of that has been removed, and they've put in golf courses, but they're also aiming to. So there's 3 golf courses in the area now. But they're also aimed to remove most of the red pine out of that area and restore the barrens. So I mean, you can see them if anybody has ever golfed out there. You can really see what the kind of work they've kind of done just around surrounding the golf courses, and then some of those areas that they're really working to restore the jack pine ecosystem in those areas. And they're still somewhat of a new partnership that we've worked with, and so much different than a commercial forest entity, but so far they've been really good, great to work with, and they really want to conserve Kirtland's warblers as one of the flagship species they're really proud of having on their land. And then you have the brown-headed cowbird, which are very cool birds, but unfortunately they're very hard on a lot of birds. Historically, these birds migrated with the bison, but as more and more cattle ranches developed, and bison were almost eliminated from the landscape. They've adapted to becoming much more sedentary, and they don't follow the bison herds like obviously the bison herds. Even the bison herds that are still around today don't have long distance migrations like they used to. So these birds the females they'll perch out on these lookouts that are typically like dead trees and snags. So we try to get rid of a lot of those dead trees and snags, and we'll just watch the birds, like similar to what we do, and they'll find out where their nests are, and they'll parasitize them. And they'll do, I mean, they do this to a lot of birds, but when you have a species as sensitive as this, especially state endangered, they're still state endangered in Wisconsin, and they're not going to be removed from that list anytime soon. So the bird, they'll go into that nest, and it's very cool life history of these birds. They do this, but unfortunately, we don't want them to be doing it in Kirtland's warbler nests. But you can see that the brown-headed cowbird egg is quite a bit bigger than the Kirtland's warbler egg. There's those 3 eggs, and then if on the bottom, you can see the Kirtland's warbler on the left of the screen with the bright yellow bill, and the brown-headed cowbird on the right. They usually hatch a little earlier and they grow faster, and they just outcompete the birds. So that basically they make the nest will fail, but the Kirtland's warblers don't know the difference, and so they'll continue to feed the surviving chicks, which will be brown-headed cowbirds. So it just creates a lot of nest failure. We only have, it used to be, and we were aware of this problem because in lower Michigan, they had a lot of brown-headed cowbird problems. For some reason, they don't have that problem much anymore. Part of it is that the population has increased so much, but part of it is that the brown-headed cowbirds are plummeting in that area. Unfortunately, in Adams County, they're actually skyrocketing, and we think it's because through their opening of the golf courses and stuff like that, there's a lot more open land that these brown-headed cowbirds like, and so it's creating better habitat for them. So it's one of those things that we learned they were parasitizing them a lot. So we had to institute some control measures for the birds. So you can see here, that's Barry Benson. He just retired, but he's done a fabulous job since the inception of this project. And he's built these brown-headed cowbird traps that we've just put on, catch a couple of brown-headed cowbirds and put them in there, and then they attract the other birds. And so we place these around different areas throughout the breeding site, a little bit away from the breeding site, so not to bring in a lot of brown-headed cowbirds, but to just try to really knock down the populations in those areas that have Kirtland's warbler nesting. And it's been a resounding success, and to the point where we barely have any cowbird parasitism anymore. Nothing we do in Wisconsin, in Adams County, is lead Wisconsin Natural Resources Foundation field trips. Again, the Natural Resources Foundation is one of our main partners, one of our main funding partners. Through the annual birdathon, the Bird Protection Fund, we get a lot of money from them. So we partner with them to go ahead and lead these, along with the Fish and Wildlife Service, to lead these field trips with these buses. So we're adapting to how we've been doing them, but basically we show people the cowbird trapping, we show people the nesting areas. Hopefully we get them out on the birds, and so they could see some of the birds. And we have people that are guiding them out there. And then we also talk about the whole ecosystem that's out there. People really like it. It's we really try to keep like all sensitive species, we try to keep the breeding locations of these pretty quiet, and obviously these people know where they are. We also we don't prohibit it, but we definitely advise them not to venture out and go off of these dirt paths during the breeding season, because they're so easy to step on those nests, and also because it draws in predators. So hopefully we're trying to really strike a balance here where we're allowing people to get out there and see these rare birds. A lot of people have never seen them. Pretty much you'd had to have gone to Michigan to be able to have seen one in the past. We've had more than 1,000 people from 40 states and 7 foreign countries and participate in the tours, and it generates some money for the Kirtland's Warbler Fund as well, and that we use for putting up housing for our nest monitors, who are oftentimes newly graduated students, and a lot of times are not from the state and don't have any local housing. So it's and we can't, as the Wisconsin DNR, we can't, and the Fish and Wildlife Service, we can't rent housing because of insurance issues, but the Natural Resources Foundation can. So they put up the housing. They use these funds from these field trips to put up the housing. And lately, we've got the foresters out there before with the Plum Creek and Meteor, which was the company that owned it afterwards. And now we have Sand Valley, their biologists and their ecologists come out and talk about the management they're doing for the species on those properties in Adams County. And then some research that we're doing. This is Ashley Ola, or she was, before she was married, Ashley Hanna. She's become one of the foremost experts on Kirtland's warblers in the country. She was our nest monitor for several years, and then she started as a graduate student in Dr. Anna Pidgeon's lab at UW-Madison. And she's done all of her graduate work. She's nearing the end of her PhD. She's done all of her graduate work on Kirtland's warblers. Interestingly enough, she did a winter stint in the Bahamas, and she actually found a bird that she had helped band in Adams County in the Bahamas. So she sighted it there. So that was quite a fun. Talk about finding a needle in a haystack. So she's done a lot of work. She's an excellent nest monitor, and she's been a valuable person. She's trained a lot of the nest monitors that have come after her. And she's looked at basically 3 things, and the predators, that are out there trying to get a handle on the predators. And she's done this through various means of putting temporary radio transmitters on the birds, on the fledglings, and then trying to see if those fledglings and how they're using the site. So we didn't really know if they're really secretive because they're not very good flyers, but we didn't know what kind of habitat they were using. We didn't know if they were using the similar habitat. We don't know if they were staying near the nesting sites or they were dispersing. So we wanted to find out what kind of habitat those nestlings, those fledglings were require, so that we could manage duly and help the species. And then also nest site selections. What is specifically, so a lot of habitat vegetation analysis, where we really went out and kind of determined the composition of the understory under these trees, and what was there something that they were keying in on? We know that blueberries they like to have blueberry plants around there. We obviously know they need the grasses and sedges. We just didn't really know what else. And again, Wisconsin is quite a bit different in habitat, especially our understory, than what the areas that they're using in Michigan. Primarily, this is because most of these areas that the birds are using are either currently or were formerly commercial timber harvest. Even the county forests are commercial timber harvested lands, and because of that, there was a lot of vegetation spraying when you're planting young trees to try to get the release, try to knock back oaks and so forth, but it also really limits the composition of the understory, where a lot of places we just have sedges and not much else, and not a lot of forbs. I kind of alluded to before, another trick we've used is these playbacks. And again, the birds are very territorial and they're semi-colonial, meaning that they typically like to nest next to territories of other birds. So if we can get a pair nesting or a male setting up a territory in an area, we have a lot better chance of drawing in other birds to that area. So we kind of tricked them, and we put these playbacks, and we play male singing calls, territorial calls, throughout the nesting season in areas that we know we don't have nesting, or we're pretty sure we don't have nesting, and trying to draw them into new areas. So we've been doing that in Bayfield County and Marinette County, and since about 2015. We've also done it in Vilas County. It's been a resounding success. We got a lot of birds in Marinette County. There was in 2016 when we kind of started this project, we had brought in we had 10 males in Marinette County. We had 7 males in Marinette County with 4 females, and there were 4 nests, and we ended up fledging 15 birds, and 10 of those were in Marinette and 5 in Bayfield. So basically in 3 years, when we started the experiment in 2014, we went from no consistent reproduction in these areas and to we have had breeding in Marinette County consistently since then. It hasn't worked so well in Bayfield County, and some of that might have to do with the less habitat available, and some of it's getting a little bit too old. But we're trying to, Vilas County is another area that was been managed for Kirtland's warblers, but it's typically very young for us right now. So we've been recently trying to use these playbacks to draw in birds to Vilas County. So we've done a lot of work led by our own Nick Anich, and working with the Mike Ward, the Illinois Natural History Survey. They designed this playback. They did it for 3 years. It showed it works, and so now we're using it as a management tool. So with the cooperative efforts among all the conservation partners, the Kirtland's warbler population is now estimated to be over 2,300 pairs, which is more than double the recovery goal of 1,000 birds. So, you know, we soared past that milestone of the recovery a long time ago. But because, again, they're so management dependent, we were hesitant to really rush forward for delisting because of all the things that we really wanted to make sure that all the mechanisms were in place, all the partners were in place that were dedicated to continue to manage the habitat for the species. So for 16 straight years, though, now we've exceeded that recovery goal of 1,000 species. On April 12th, 2018, the Fish and Wildlife Service proposed to remove the bird from the Endangered Species Act. It wasn't without controversy. A lot of people were very concerned that the partners, without the impetus of the Fish and Wildlife Service driving it, a lot of the states, Michigan and Wisconsin in particular, wouldn't continue to manage for the species. They're not an endangered species anymore in Michigan state-wise either. Again, they are in Wisconsin, so they're one of our. But Michigan is very dedicated to managing for the species, and so are we. We're going to monitor the species for not less than 5 years, probably more like 15 years. And it's part of the whole post-delisting monitoring period. We want to make sure that we can't just say we're doing the management. We want to make sure that the management is being done and the birds are responding accordingly. So if we start to see a rapid decline in the species, we're gonna, they can step back in and either relist them or try to address that issue. So if any time during that period, that post-delisting monitoring period, which will include censuses every 3 years, with complete census where we're trying to get a snapshot of the population every 3 years throughout their entire range, the Fish and Wildlife Service can come in and reinstate them and put them back on the endangered species list with an emergency rule. So on October 8th, 2019, the bird was successfully delisted, and we really, really celebrated that milestone. There's hard work still there. There's still lots of work that's going to have to be done to keep the species, and of course, we want it to continue to grow geographically and numerically. But small conservation successes like this are rare, and it's just, especially, it was just a monumental effort through many partners, and a lot of money that just went into to preserving the species. And it's a good feeling to be a part of that process. So it was a long road coming, though. It's 60 years of actively managing the bird. Obviously, mostly that in Michigan. You can see the population graph there up until 2015. There was no census done in 2014, which is why there's a gap there. And that the line going across there at 1,000 is the recovery goal that was set in the 1985 Kirtland's Warbler recovery plan. So we, strongly surpassed that and continue to have it grow. And so the final determination was, hey, we've had it for at least 16 years, and we surpassed the recovery goal. We're continuing to see population trends, upward population trends. We have a lot of great partners in place and mechanisms in place that Fish and Wildlife Service determined, and after public review, that they indeed would delist the bird, and not even down. A lot of times, most of the time, the mechanism is to downlist a bird too. But we had so far exceeded the recovery goal that they decided to just delist the bird. There are some drawbacks to that. It means that there's not a lot of federal funds available anymore for managing the bird. And so other partners have stepped in, nonprofits, both in Michigan and in Wisconsin, that are trying to set up endowments that'll preserve, secure funding for the management of the species and for the foreseeable future. Bird watching is also a really important recreational activity, as all you probably know. Wisconsin is a huge birding area, and so these tours that we offer in Michigan and Wisconsin are really popular. And again, these birds especially in Michigan, these birds are found in some really vast forests. So it's not necessarily easy just to go out and find them. It really helps to have someone trained in there. And you can see that the people are standing well away from any nesting habitat so that we're not trampling and disturbing the birds too much. The birds are pretty charismatic. They aren't bothered too much by people's presence. Don't really see people as much of a threat, so they're not easily flushed and scared away that way. Especially the males are the ones that you're going to be seeing. And the ones singing, they don't sit on the nest at all. They bring the food back to the female that's doing the incubation, and so they do tolerate the presence of humans. But our biggest concern is trampling the nest or encouraging predators nest predation. So really, let's focus again on that multi-species conservation. The recovery team has recognized the importance of this community and the engagement of the people that utilize these communities since the inception of the recovery plans for this bird. That a healthy jack pine ecosystem is really key for the species, but it also benefits other species like white-tailed deer, turkey, snowshoe hare, ruffed grouse, and other more sensitive species like the Vesper sparrow here, center glass lizard, carnival butterfly, and clay-colored sparrow, which you can see clay-colored sparrows are really abundant in these areas, and see slender glass lizards that are really cool species. Obviously, they look like a snake, but not. And then you can see the male carnival butterfly, these tiny little butterflies that many of you may have seen if you've frequented these areas. Now, we just know that if we have a healthy system and we make sure that we have the diversity, we're trying to limit pesticide use in these areas, herbicide use in these areas, even though that's beneficial for planting trees. So try to get away from the the commercial management, strictly commercial management of the trees, recognizing that they're going to be outcompeted by some of the hardwoods in some of these areas. And to try to encourage forbs, we're going to go in and start planting forbs. Obviously, lupin is key for nesting, for egg laying for the Carner blue butterfly. But any of these kind of forbs that attract pollinators not only provide a diverse ecosystem for all these other species, but they provide food sources for for Kirtland's warblers, as they're primarily insectivorous. They all will also feed on berries. Blueberries are a good component out there. Not only does it attract insects, but they will use that as a foraging plant too. So that's my presentation for the evening. And I'll take any questions you have. But before I do so, I just wanted to, if you want to help these species and others, one way you can do so is to donate to our Endangered Species Fund, or through the DNR, or you could do a tax checkoff on your taxes, or you can buy one of our endangered resources plates. The Eagle plate is the current one that's out there now, you may have seen on cars. And all those go into benefiting in the management of Carners and Kirtlands, Carners, whooping cranes, and a bunch of other species.
Okay, thank you so much, Davin. If you wanted to use the reactions on Zoom, you can always give them a little round of applause for the presentation. I know it's very, very different that we can't just hear the applause for you, but it was very thorough. And we have a few questions that did come in. So I'll read those now. And Patty Rouse had said that, and she has toured the Sand County Golf Club, so she knew about that site there in Adams County as well. And she had just asked about the Kirtland Warbler recovery area, and she was just wondering if you were aware of any updates or progress. And I think you covered it during the presentation, but if there's anything else you want to add specifically about that Sand County Golf Club and that partnership there.
Just as an ongoing thing, they're obviously still doing a lot of work. There's a lot of restoration they're trying to do. They're still building golf courses in the area. They're still putting recreational trails in the area. They want informational signs. They're really trying to put the infrastructure in place. So it's an ongoing thing. They're not even close to being done with all the things that they want to put in that area. But they have a lot of the infrastructure is in there, some of the roads, some of the lodging and so forth like that. So we just continue to work with them, the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Wisconsin DNR, and make sure that they know that they have the resources and tools to be able to manage for the species as best as they can, and these other species that are found on that ecosystem in that area.
Okay, very neat. Next question is Elizabeth Whelan had said, it's a beginner's question, but I think all questions are good, so don't worry about that, Elizabeth. If a preferred habitat is not available for the birds, will they just not nest, or will they nest and they will just be less successful or completely unsuccessful?
As far as we know, they just won't nest at all. We've never really found. I mean, it was a discovery to find that they would use red pine plantations that were intermixed with jack pine. They do that in Ontario as well. So it's something that we hadn't seen them do in Michigan. So that was nice, because obviously the foresters would much rather have some red pine in there than just only jack pine. But as far as like anything else, if they don't have those jack pine component in there, as far as we know, they're just not. They move on. We don't know exactly what happened to them, or they just don't nest. Obviously, they could survive without the jack pine, and they can. But as far as we know, they will not reproduce without the jack pine component.
Is Wisconsin and Michigan the primary locations for these jack pine sands in the United States?
Yeah.
Okay.
Minnesota has some too, and Canada going up into Ontario. Yeah.
Okay. Janet Smith asks, are the private lands on Adams County where the Kirklands nest protected by conservation easements? If not, is there an opportunity for land trusts to protect them? She knows that the North Central Conservancy Trust would be interested in protecting some lands with conservation easements, and specifically in Adams County, if there is an opportunity there.
So the areas, the primary areas that they're using for nesting are found in those two easements I referred to. One of them specifically for Kirtland's warbler, and one of them's just a more general forest easement, legacy easement. So they are both protected in perpetuity under those easements. And we foresee, I mean, so that there's not, they can't put any golf courses or anything recreational in there really. So, you know, we would foresee that we haven't saturated that area at all. And there's still a lot of management that they're going to be, they're willing to do, and then we're going to try to fund. So for Adams County, I mean, I think we're set on terms of the Sand Valley property that we have the conservation easements in place. But as we move forward, we'd really like to focus on, because there's so much private land in Adams County, and we're really working on developing mapping techniques to be able to identify potential habitat throughout the range of the bird outside of the Lower Peninsula. So really focusing on continue to expand the breeding range of these birds. One of the American Bird Conservancy in Sean Groff, one of their major pushes is to help develop these conservation funds that will, and hopefully target private lands in Adams County with easements. So there could be very much for future land acquisition or not acquisition, but easement acquisition in those lands on other private lands, focusing on the species. So yes, definitely it's something that we'd be interested in discussing for sure.
Well, great. Well, you've got the interest there in the North Central Conservancy Land Trust. Sorry.
Yeah. Great. Yeah.
Question from Janet was, what was the estimated risk of the birds losing significant winter habitat at sea level rises around the Bahamas? Well, this is a good climate change in general question. Changing of forest types we're even seeing in Wisconsin. So yeah, any comment on that?
Yeah, big danger. I think that probably because the protections aren't necessarily in place, and because of sea level rise, and they're utilizing these really specific scrubby habitats, and those islands are typically kind of flat, they're very susceptible to sea level rise. And you know, it's something that we don't know if they'll move elsewhere. I mean, there's probably other suitable habitat, but they're not habitat generalists in any part of their life history. So, you know, we don't really know how they're going to respond to that. And then, you know, we've seen more and more hurricanes, and it could have been a real disaster if those birds had already made it to their wintering sites when that last Hurricane Dorian hit, and that it would really potentially really devastated the population. In terms of Wisconsin and their wintering, summering habitat, breeding habitats, we've done some modeling. It's really hard to say how jack pine is going to respond to a warming ecosystem. We actually think that maybe that it really depends on really how the weather and the rainfall is affected by that. You know, these are already pretty warm areas because they're so sandy, and the jack pine tolerates heat pretty well, but what they can't tolerate, and they'll tolerate some more increased rainfall, but the birds won't. And so I mean, if we start to get really torrential spring rains that'll flood out these birds, we could get a lot of high nest failure. So don't know exactly how jack pine and these ecosystems are going to respond to climate change up here, but they're definitely, like so many species, could potentially be affected by it.
This is a good question. Patty asked, do the Wisconsin birds winter in the same locations as the Michigan birds?
Yes. As far as we know, I mean, we know that some of them do. So they do banding down there too. And like I said, we did find a bird that we banded in Wisconsin in the Bahamas. We're starting to use a lot of the Modus tower technology to try to we don't really know what the dispersal pattern is. We roughly know what their migration pattern is, very roughly. Mostly we just know that they leave upper Midwest, and they end up in the Bahamas. So we assume that they're flying down that little flyway like a lot of other species that we know are using that same area. But we're starting to use a lot of MODIS technology, not only to track their migration patterns, but also to track their dispersal. We just assume that the birds that we're getting in Michigan and in Wisconsin are coming in through the UP, but we don't know that at all. I mean, they could be splitting off and going on the other side of the lake, as far as we know, as they're coming north. So, but yeah, they all winter in the same area.
Will they breed in the same location they fledged? So do they typically go back to their, okay.
Yeah, they have pretty good site fidelity. So we'll typically, when we've been doing the banding of the fledglings, we'll see those birds for several years again in those areas and surrounding areas. So they're pretty, so long as the habitat's still there for them and it's still good, we don't have saturated habitat in probably almost any place in Wisconsin. So they'll come back and they can set up the territories in those areas. But yeah, they tend to have a lot of site fidelity. Not to say that some of the birds aren't dispersing. Again, we just assume that the birds are dispersing out of Michigan through the upper peninsula. That's becoming a little bit more saturated, so we assume that they're dispersing out of there. And we figure that it's because the density of the populations is driving the dispersal. But that's just a guess, just based on other, educated guess.
Okay. Ann Graham asks, if a nest is lost, will the birds re-nest?
Yes.
They will.
If it's early enough, yeah. Mm-hmm.
If it's early enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that is the last of the questions, unless people are quick to get those in. I'm just curious, how many people have seen a Kirtland warblers? You can use the reactions to do a thumbs up on it. If you see those little reaction tabs, Janet Smith, you've seen one, cool. Jan Seiler, you've seen one, that is awesome. I have not. And my daughter's here, we have not. Nice. And Graham has seen a Kirtland's warbler. Got to go into the other page. John Graham, Ann Graham. There's like 2 pages of my gallery here. So if I'm not, Sarah, do you have a question? I see your hand raising, or have you seen one as well? It looks like you're seeing one as well. Mike has seen one. Robert Lane is giving you an applause. This is really a great presentation. My daughter says hello. She's also interested in birds. With me in Wapaka. We use the Wapaka Field Station we band at. So she's really interested in this topic, and she's a budding ornithologist herself. So
cool. Very cool.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm just going to give a few reminders of upcoming programs. We have Junior Audubon starting on March 10th. We'll be returning. There is currently a poll out there for people to vote on their birds. So if you have grandkids, if you have children yourself, if you have nieces or nephews who would like to be part of the Junior Audubon, we're going to be drawing birds, and we are taking a poll right now of which bird that will be. And I believe the ruby-throated hummingbird is winning, but the bald eagle is close behind, and so is that great horned owl. So check that out on Facebook if you would like, our Facebook page. We have a brand new website, so please check that out. It's becoming very popular, and we have had great feedback. If you have additional comments or feedback, please feel free to email us. The Audubon website or email is right on the website. You can give us comments or changes or suggestions you'd like to see. Our next program is going to be on St. Patrick's Day, so March 17th. Eric Anderson, one of our board members, is going to be speaking on the Wisconsin State Natural Areas. How do we protect nature in the face of climate change? Please, that program is up and available if you'd like to sign up and register for that one as well and continue our conversations that we have. Davin, thank you so much. You're getting a lot of kudos in the chat box. If you can look at the chat box, you can see all of those wonderful comments you're seeing. People, we really do appreciate your time. We appreciate the DNR's efforts in supporting these important species and conservation for the lands that we're seeing as well. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Wonderful turnout as well. We do hope you continue to connect on our website and on Facebook as well. And thanks for coming tonight. Great job.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.